Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Ruth Gamble and I'm chairing this session on air pollution issues in smart city development from La Trobe in Melbourne. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation in the land they call Naarm, and that these lands were never ceded. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people that may be listening to the webinar today. So this is the eighth and final webinar in the series for 2022, presented by IIT Kanpur and La Trobe University Research Academy in collaboration with ASCRIN, the Smart Cities in Asia Network. From identifying a problem to developing solutions and evaluating implementation strategies, ASCRIN works with research-focused groups, government, global industry partners, and startups to bring ideas to life. In line with improving sustainability, livability, and efficiency, the network has identified 10 interconnected themes for developing research projects. Each of these themes are presenting a webinar on the broad topic of smart cities they have over this year. This presentation is part of the health and well-being theme. Urban planning frameworks are necessary to ensure that the initiatives required to create smart cities are successful and create healthy spaces for their residents. Now, today we're going to be talking about air pollution, a vital issue in today's India, and although it doesn't get as much attention in Australia too. We have three speakers to discuss the topic, two based in India and one in Australia. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Anju Goel, who is a research fellow at the Energy and Resource Institute, TERI. They use the in the acronym, I like that, in New Delhi, India. And she researches environmental and health issues using social science and statistical methods. She's also involved in data-driven policy making. The focus of her current research at TERI is the development of air quality management plans. And then we also have Professor Mukesh Sharma. He teaches at IIT Kanpur, our colleagues in the development of the ASCRIN project in the Department of Civil Engineering. His research and teaching focuses on many aspects of air pollution modelling, assessment, control, and governance. And prior to being at IIT Kanpur, he worked for the Central Pollution Control Board in Delhi, which must have been a very tough job. And we also have Professor bin Jalaludin, who is joining us from Australia. He is an environmental epidemiologist and the chief investigator for the Centre for Air Pollution, Energy and Health Research at the University of New South Wales. He's an expert on the effects of urban air pollution on human health, especially as a result of bushfires, which we know all about in Australia and also in some cases in India. So we're going to start with a Q&A. I'm going to ask them some questions, and we're going to have a discussion about air pollution in India and Australia. But while we're having this discussion, you'll also notice at the bottom of the Zoom panel that you will have space for a Q&A. So please place any questions that you may have and you want the participants to answer in there, and we'll come back to them at the end of the discussion. Thanks very much for that. So, right, let's start by asking the first question of Anju. So, Anju, you're in Delhi right now, yes?
Yes.
And it's that time of year in Delhi when the particle levels of air pollution gets more intense. So I was wondering if you could give us an overview or an introduction to what the situation is in Delhi and why the air pollution might be particularly bad at the moment.
Thank you, Ruth. Well, I was just looking at the current AQI in Delhi, which is around 350, and it's in the poor category. So just wanted to mention, like especially during this season, we do not have only a bad air quality in Delhi, rather the other cities in India, especially in the Indo-Gangetic Plain and the Western Ghats, they also faces the similar problem of bad air quality. In the morning, I was checking the AQI of the other cities in India. You know, Ludhiana is around 384, Mumbai is around 290, Kanpur is around 250. So there are many other cities in India which also faces the similar sort of a problem. So when you talk about winter air quality, so we all are very well aware, like the sources would remain there, and it's primarily because of the adverse meteorological condition that happens, which keeps the sources accumulated in the particular region and, you know, increases these ambient air quality concentrations. especially during winter. Yeah.
So we've got two things happening then from the sounds of it. It sounds like we've got the sources of air pollution coming into the air, and then a meteorological system that stops it dispersing. Yeah, so let's break it down for the people who don't know as much as you clearly do, which is a lot. Can we start with what are the sources of the pollution that occur, and as you said, not just in Delhi, but across a lot of northwest and northern India?
Right. So, sorry. So if we talk about sources, so, we conducted a source apportionment study, which basically tells the contribution of the different sources in the ambient PM 2.5 concentration for the year 2019. And we found that if we look at the annual contributions, so the industries, including power plant, came out to be one of the major contributor, and it contributed around 22% in the ambient PM 2.5 concentrations in Delhi, followed by...
Sorry, I was going to ask, are the power plants in Delhi mainly run on gas, or is it coal-fired power, or what's their source of energy?
Right. So all the power plants in Delhi are of gas-based, but outside Delhi, there are coal-based power plants. Similarly, if you talk about industries, so most of the air polluting industries are there in the outskirts of Delhi, but still they are contributing to the Delhi's air pollution problem, which clearly indicates that, it's more like a regional scale issue rather than a city scale issue. So further talking about sources, residential sector, especially biomass burning in the residential sector, it contributed around 14% in the PM 2.5 concentration. And when there's an onset of winter, everyone starts talking about agriculture residue burning. So we estimated its contribution as well. So if we talk about on an annual basis, it contributes around 7%, while especially during November month, it can reaches up to like 34%. Not 34, 24%, around 24% contribution in the ambient PM 2.5 concentration. We also estimated the geographical contribution in Delhi's air pollution problem, and we found that around 24% of the ambient PM 2.5 is being contributed by the sources which are located inside Delhi, while the rest of it comes from the sources which are outside Delhi. So which clearly indicates that Delhi has a high regional background which needs to be controlled if we really want to meet our national ambient air quality standards.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. First of all, you're talking about particulate matter. Is that what PM 2.5 is? Can you break that down for us? Yeah.
Right.
What exactly is that?
Particulate matter PM 2.5 when we talk about. So basically particulate matters, the name of the pollutant is defined by its size. Sometimes we call it PM10, we call it PM 2.5, we do call it PM1. So here the numbers 10, 2.5, 1 represents the size of the particulate matter. So when I call PM 2.5, it basically represents particulate matter, particles of the size 2.5 micrometer, having an aerodynamic diameter of around 2.5 micrometer.
And are they particularly bad? Are they worse than 10?
So normally, as the particle size becomes finer, so the surface area increases. And when the surface area increases, they have a susceptibility of carrying out, more harmful particles or more harmful chemicals deposited on them. Also, if you will look at the dose response curves or the respiratory dose deposition, so the finer the particle, they can penetrate deeper into the lungs. Sometimes even the nanoparticles, they can co-located along with the blood in the blood vessels. So the finer the particle, the more harmful it is.
Sorry, I was just pulling a face there thinking about those processes occurring. And that may actually is a good point to go on to Professor Sharma, because as far as I understand it, air pollution is a complicated issue for city planners and governments, because it's both environmental. As Anju was explaining, it's coming from environmental sources, but then it's also a health issue. And so I understand that you've been looking at the data of the health effects of air pollution. So very broadly, could you tell us, once these sources of pollution are in the air, what kind of effects they have on population health in both the short term and the long term?
Unmute? Well,
yes.
Well, thank you. That's you asked the very basic fundamental question as to that's the bottom line as to why are we even talking about the air pollution. The primary reason is that it affects human health. Not only human health, it affects the ecology, it affects the building, it affects our natural resources. So, but primarily when we are talking about, we're just focusing, in most of the, countries about the public health. And when we talk about the public health, the focus is again, multitude of pollutants. But again, the focus has largely been on PM 2.5 lately, and for the very good reason that Anju explained, because it is a basically surrogate of toxicity, to say the least, actually. And not only the toxicity, but the toxicity which goes deeper in the lungs. So it's just not the toxicity outside, it takes you deeper inside the lung, and then it goes into your bloodstream, and it can cause all kinds of problems. So it is a surrogate basically of the toxicity, and therefore we focus on PM 2.5 regardless. So what happens then, the short term, you are suddenly put into a smaller the congested area where the pollution levels are high. You'll start to, most normally you'll start to cough, start coughing, you'll start to feel uneasy, your eyes will start to little bit start to little get burned. But again, suppose you are there for a short time and you come out of that place, that's how we sometimes advise people to avoid the exposure itself. So that is a short-term kind of thing, and you are in all possibility, you're likely to recover completely, actually. So, but that short term was also very uncomfortable. You don't like it. You feel very uneasy. And however, there's the long-term effect also. So you can sustain long-term diseases. And that especially happens long-term is you're exposed for a very long time, even to pollution levels which are sound to be relatively low. And these long-term diseases, it shortens your life. It shortens, what we call as a disability adjusted years, because you might be living but still got some disability, and as a result you have to live with that disability, actually. And these mortality issues are there. So most the mortality issues can be your lung cancer, for example, ischemic heart disease, the brain stroke, and lower respiratory infection. So they all lead to mortality, and there are enough studies and documentation, and internationally, that what might happen at what level, what exposure, and how the life is shortened because of this thing. So we also have studied how it happens in the cities like in India, especially in the major cities, million-plus cities. The mortality rate is relatively high because our pollution levels are high. Therefore, the focus has to be on the reducing the emissions, so that we get the people out of these issues and problem, and people live very healthy life.
So what are the major issues that the governance, you're talking about stopping the pollution coming about, clearing it from the atmosphere. What are the major governance issues that have, what hasn't happened from a governance perspective, and what needs to happen in order to improve the air quality in these cities that you're talking about, the million-plus cities in India?
See, again, very important question. After all, as scientists, engineers, we have to find the solutions, actually. We might come up with the solution, but the solutions are, because the scale of the problem is so large, these whatever actions or whatever solutions are there has to be done at the government level, most of them at the policy level. And I'm so happy to say that, well, the problem has very well been recognized in India and Indian cities, and the issue has been taken up at the highest level, at the Prime Minister's office level, actually, in India, actually. So what they have done in 2019, what they have come up with is what we call National Clean Air Action Plan, or we call it NCAP, actually. So within the NCAP, there are 3 levels of the actions that are being proposed or, being implemented. So at the national level, we have certain policies that has to, in terms of the certain reductions, and also in terms of making sure that the finances are available, because nothing gets going unless there's the money available and people are, sort of that budgetary provisions are there. So that part number 1. Second thing is that, well, we have the provision and the state level listing. So that state are pretty independent in India, as you would know. So state also take their own action, they make the action plan. So interestingly, like the action, sometimes we can make the action plan very well in the, on the papers, frankly speaking. But then what happens is the larger responsibility has given to the for the not only preparation but also implementation and submitting it to this federal government by the states actually, and the responsibility with the chief secretary himself is the highest executive person in the state actually. And at the third level is the what Anju was talking, the source apportionment at the city level and taking the actions at the city level. So when the three levels are integrated, we are sure that the NCAP will be successful, and this is very well supported by the finances that is required. So I see all the reasons to be very successful in next 3 to 5 years, and then we'll start to see the results. Thank you.
Okay, so that's interesting though, because you're talking about it needing to be at these different levels of governance, city level, state level. Does it need to also be at an international level? Because something that occurs to me from my preparation for this and from the information that you've given me is that air pollution doesn't stay in one place; it floats. It moves. It wouldn't be stopped by a roadblock. Yeah, so it'd be hard to stop the pollution from floating from one place to another. How can governance issues deal with this transboundary issues? Is there a way that they can work together that different jurisdictions can work, and that could even happen on an international scale? Is that possible?
You want me to react on that?
Yeah, I want you to tell me how it works, if it's possible, and how much that makes this governance issue tricky.
Yeah, indeed, actually, you see, we all understand the pollution, transport, or even it's a transformation, it doesn't follow any administrative or political boundaries. So undoubtedly, the pollution, can travel far distances, even at the international boundaries. In fact, you will be surprised that, we might even track certain pollution coming in India as far as, the Swat Valley, where, the residue burning takes place. That's a starting point actually. And then, most of the wind blows from the northwest. So these from Central Asia to Pakistan, things can come, and the Indian pollution can go to other countries. And also there's a larger international cooperation is certainly required. But this issue is still not highlighted as much as we should. Largely, people are trying to saturate their own, on their own houses to make sure that first whatever best can be done. But your point is very well taken. There has to be larger cooperation. And the other thing, there's the directly or rather indirectly benefit when the countries are coordinating and collaborating on the climate change issues, especially on the CO2. So there are co-benefit exists along with the CO2. When you're reducing the CO2, obviously there are other pollutants would be sort of taken care to a large extent. So indirectly that is there, but we definitely require some formal sort of platform, formal collaboration, discussion, and make sure that we deal the issue at the larger level, going beyond the boundaries, and then, so that it will benefit all the countries, simply not the one actually, which sort of this thing. So that cooperation would be definitely required and should be welcome.
Yeah, we'll come back to CO2 in a minute. I was going to move from to an even bigger scale, looking at like more globally, and ask Professor Jalaludin whether there's no connection, is there, between what happens in India and Australia's pollution? There's no transboundary too big, is it? Well, Professor, you need to unmute.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Look, that's an interesting question. As far as we know, we do not really get transboundary air pollution from Indian sources, because a lot of the transboundary air pollution depends on your prevailing winds and so on. And so obviously that doesn't get this far. I think most of our colleagues would have heard about in Australia in 2019 and 2020, over a period of 2 or 3 months, we had some very serious, what we call bushfires, and what in other countries might be called forest fires. And our levels were extremely high. And if you read some of the reports, you'd have heard or you've read about the plumes of smoke actually got to South America, New Zealand, South America, and then back to Australia. So, so the smoke travel long distances. The other case in point would be which is again well known, the Indonesian forest fires in Sumatra. In Sumatra, we've been having forest fires for the last 2 or 3 decades. Now things been getting worse over the time. And in 2015, we had some major forest fires, which then was blown over towards Malaysia, Singapore, I think southern Philippines, and perhaps parts of Southeast Asia. And and there were some studies looking at the effects of those forest fires. It was estimated that in Indonesia, those forest fires caused about a 10,000 deaths. In Malaysia, about just over 2,000 deaths, and in Singapore, about 1,000 deaths. So it becomes a very political question, a very political, a socio-political issue. Throughout the forest fires in Indonesia, the ASEAN countries tried to get a transboundary haze agreement to try to control forest fires. The way ASEAN works, which is a range of Southeast Asian countries, who are part of ASEAN, every country has to agree to it before it can be signed off. And the transboundary haze agreement, I think, has taken 10 or 12, 15 years, and Indonesia was the last one to sign off on it.
So it would be very tough for them, I guess, to be able to get up to those standards when they're dealing with such a big issue.
Look, it's a very, very difficult issue. Singapore, I might just add, Singapore has passed laws to prosecute companies that burn the forest, and these are large timber plantation owners and oil palm owners. Unfortunately, many of these owners of these plantations are Malaysian companies or Singaporean companies. So what Indonesia says is, you tell your companies to control the fires.
Yeah, and that kind of, when you were speaking and the others were speaking, I was actually thinking, people have this idea of Australia as being a very clean place, but from what you're saying, we've been like the fires, which have some anthropogenic causes, were contributing to smoke as far away as South America, and then into Southeast Asia. And you also have done studies about the levels of pollution in Australia on a longer term, because as Professor Sharma was saying, if you have one instance, it can be harmful, but it's usually long-term particulate pollution that it causes harm. So that you're looking at pollution in Australia, which is apparently not as clean as it could be either.
Look, it's I guess the ASCRIN situation is quite different from the Indian situation. Our levels of fine particles, or the PM2.5s, are relatively low, and by global standards, we do very well. We are generally, our annual average is generally below 10 micrograms per meter cube, and our daily average of fine particles in Sydney, for example, might be 10 to 15 micrograms per meter cube. So if you compare that with some of the Indian cities where the levels can be up to 100, 150 micrograms per meter cube. So our levels are relatively low. However, there have been many recent studies that have shown that you can get air pollution effects even at low levels, even at levels below 10 micrograms per meter cube. And the other point to note is that we think there's no threshold to find particle levels causing health effects. So
it's just if there's any
Yeah,
then it couldn't cause
that's
health
right.
effects.
So, I mean, there's a certain level you probably can't go below. There are certain, even in the most pristine environment, you'll get some levels of fine particles. Could be between 1 and 3 micrograms per meter cube. This could be dust storms, wind-blown particles, sea salt, and so on. So you'll always measure some level of fine particles, but we're finding health effects at lower levels. And the most recent WHO air quality guidelines, which came out in 2021, they've really drastically reduced the air quality guidelines for PM 2.5.
And what are the main sources of air pollution in Australia?
Look, it would be very similar to many other countries. The proportion might vary a bit. So it's around traffic. It is around power plants, heavy industry, cars, buses, trucks, trains, shipping is a source, but it's very region specific. So if you look at a coal mining area in northern New South Wales, coal mining activities might make up 50 to 60% of PM 2.5. If you look at metropolitan Sydney, which is a large city, perhaps not as large as the mega cities of India or China, with a population of around 4 to 4.5 million, light industry, traffic would be around 15% of contribution to PM 2.5. And surprisingly, what surprises many people is that wood burning is about 40 to 50%. And why wood burning? Wood burning, for our Indian colleagues and our audience, people in Australia, and I guess many European and American in the US, they like to burn wood in either in open fireplace or in a wood burning stove for heating during winter, and mainly for the ambience. It feels nice.
I was going to say that's ambience. That's nothing to do with actually needing to burn wood.
No. We have gas. You can use gas. We can have electric heaters. So there's nothing stopping us from moving to cleaner energy. And on a winter's day in Sydney, about 50% of the PM 2.5 is from residential wood heating, and from many other colder in regional New South Wales and Victoria and elsewhere, wood heating is a major problem. So this is surprising.
Surprising and kind of disturbing. It is burning things for an aesthetic, or is it kind of disturbing? Yeah.
And there's certainly a lot of work going on at the moment of trying to encourage people to move away from wood burning to other cleaner fuels. Okay,
that's I'm still trying to process that. But I might move on to asking, because it's on a related issue to Anju. So Professor Sharma told us that there's already a policy, the National Clean Air Program, and it's got the basic framework there to transform India's cities. I'm wondering if you've looked at how it is actually operating on the ground, and if you have any data that you can tell us about how, because this series is focused on smart cities. If you have any data about how smart cities are doing in implementing the National Clean Air Program or other clean air programs.
Thank you, Ruth. Professor Sharma has already explained about NCAP. So just wanted to mention that, under the 15th Finance Commission, there is a grant of around 4,400 crore that is being allocated for air quality improvements in the city. And this money is being distributed by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which is the nodal ministry in India to look after air pollution, to these cities, and they have specifically they have formulated a mechanism to distribute this money among these cities based on the performance they achieve. and they have set a target of a PM10 reduction for each of these cities based on their ambient PM particulate PM10 or PM2.5 concentration, and these targets are being provided to these cities. And if they achieve the target, then they receive the full grant. If they do not achieve, so the grant will be extended for the next year. So that is how, some monetary arrangements are being placed in order to have an implementation on the ground, in order to make sure that the improvements are happening on the ground. And if you talk about smart cities in India, currently we have 100 smart cities, and out of these, around 83 smart cities, they are equipped with the integrated command and control center. So integrated command and control center basically, it collate data from all the sources. So there you can collate data, there you can compare the traffic levels with the current air quality levels at that spot. They have the best quality cameras being installed everywhere in the city. So actually, this sort of an infrastructure can actually be used to strengthen the implementation, on ground implementation at the city scale. And also at the same time, when we monitor air quality, so the local condition also impacts a lot in terms of the levels that we are getting at the monitoring stations. So in order to manage hotspots, air pollution hotspots in the cities, especially in the smart cities, because like some of these smart cities are also the non-attainment cities in India. So when you talk about smart cities,
what's a non-attainment city? Oh, so the smart cities are not attaining the levels, bringing down the levels.
So non-attainment.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So non-attainment cities are basically those cities which haven't met their national ambient air quality standard for PM10 consistently for 5 years. So if a city do not meet a standard consistently for 5 years, it will come under the category of non-attainment cities. In India, currently we have 132 non-attainment cities, and some of these non-attainment cities are smart cities as well. So there, this integrated command and control center can actually play a crucial role to monitor the sources at the city scale. So the stricter monitoring of air pollution sources can ultimately result in the reduction of these sources and the improvement in air quality.
So that's using like smart technology in order to bring down pollution, right? So there seems to be the technologies and governance mechanisms that can make air quality better in both Australia and in India. You've talked a little bit about some of these, and I'm going to ask you about carbon transition in a minute. But just before we get to that, what are some of the major hurdles? If you had to describe, like, this is the major issues that are going to stop India's cities getting cleaner, what would they be? First of all, to you, Professor Sharma.
So you want Professor Sharma to react? Yeah. Okay.
So you means, the technology and what could possibly
it sounds like
done?
Well, technology seems to be helping. Some governance issues seem to be improving the situation. I want to know, what are the major obstacles that are in the way of improving the air quality in the India smart cities? Why are some of the smart cities non-compliant cities? What are the obstacles to these improvements?
Okay, right, got it. See, of course, the action plan would be there. But one of the major things which is happening in the cities, and I think that's true for almost all cities, we are constantly doing the demolition of certain things and building the new things. That is true across the world, all the cities, that action is going on. So that is one thing that that challenge comes in. And India is one still developing a lot of infrastructure and residential houses and large buildings and all. So that's point number one when we talk specifically inside the city. So that constantly there's a construction and demolition, and there are certain rules and regulations, but those rules and regulations sometimes are not followed because of certain limitations, and sometimes the constructor or the contractor is not even aware of it, and therefore that is one part which sort of get ignored. That's point number one. Point number two, what is happening is the the biggest obstacle is the congestion that we are getting in the cities. So because of the congestion problem, the overall speed of the vehicles have come down so much. And as a result, you sort of have to go to a distance of 5 kilometers, you budget like, sort of half an hour. So as a result, you are doing more of the pollution. So that the decongestion is very important. Third issue, which is obstructing, even if we all want to do, parking is a big problem. One of our studies shows almost 55% of the road is used for the on-street parking. So just imagine if these are the conditions, unless we find right solutions to that one. And so these are the things which are the local obstructions that we see. So of course, the big technologies are there, they are being done. But the local level, these are the issue. And the municipal solid waste, its collection, disposal is very important. And suppose if that is not there, then there's a tendency to burn the things, as a means of disposal. So these are the obstructions and these are the difficulties. But I wouldn't say that these are big engineering problems, but these are more management.
Yeah, I was thinking even if you're going to, because I'm a big fan of the Delhi Metro, and I was thinking even building Delhi Metro, which moves people around and it means that there's less people in car, but building it is actually creating pollution as well, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Right.
We went through that phase of metro construction, and situation was bad at that time.
Yeah. And one other quick question about this with the burning is does it make a difference what you're burning? Is it more deleterious or worse for health if you burn plastic as opposed to other forms of rubbish, or is all burning bad?
See, it is rather municipal solid waste, which unfortunately has the plastic in there. We've always had the plastic. So one of the issues that we could figure it out, even if there's sincere efforts, certain areas which are simply not approachable in our cities actually.
Right.
So what happens? The collection, the big trucks or something cannot go close to that one. The collection itself is poor. When ordinary citizens, things are not collected and still they want to get rid of the waste actually. So they find it rather easy to sort of burn it. So now there are ways and procedures that smaller handheld, rickshaws can go to that area, can do the collection, So that sort of things are happening. But the collection is a larger problem, and therefore this issue. So that's what I think is the collection is an issue which is sort of not so good at the level of large cities actually.
And Professor Jalaludin, what's the major obstacles to Australia improving its air quality, do you think?
Look, firstly, I'd just like to say that we aren't as advanced in terms of smart cities, as far as I know. And we don't have a command and control center. We don't monitor in a smart way the traffic congestion, traffic flow, and so on. But apart from that, we have a system where at the national level, we have air quality standards. And then the individual states have to meet the air quality standards. But if they do not meet the air quality standards, then there is there aren't any penalties. So although we have a national guidelines, we have a PM 2.5 standards, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and so on. The states, are encouraged to meet the standards. And, some states might be better than other states. And in New South Wales, they had the action plan about 10 years ago, and they revised the action plan. And the action plan looked at the various sources. And for each of those sources, then they had a series of actions to try to reduce air pollution. And it works, but we do have days when our air pollution levels are high, and that is often because of bushfires or what we call prescribed burning, where we try to reduce the load in a forest. So we purposely burn off parts of the forest to reduce the fuel load. So when these events occur, then our air pollution levels are high, but generally we are pretty good.
And there's no burning of agriculture. I mean, because I still remember growing up with the smell of burning cane, because I grew up in Queensland. It's gone now. I've been to other places where you can still smell it, but we don't burn.
No, I think we've stopped the Queensland where cane sugar. And sure, they used to burn after harvesting, used to be burnt. In the southwest of New South Wales, where we grow a lot of rice, and they used to burn the rice stubble. Even I think about 10 years ago, we were doing that. But I'm not sure that we are still doing it. We stopped burning of rubbish in New South Wales in the 1950s, 60s, up to 70s. People used to burn rubbish in their backyard, and just like what you were saying, Professor Mukesh. And then laws were introduced to prohibit burning rubbish in the backyard, and our air quality improved tremendously.
Now we're just burning logs and pretending we're in Europe. Still a bit sad. Okay, so let's look at some hopefully positives or co-evolving positives. So I understand from what all of you have mentioned in passing that this is an international area, at least an interstate, and it goes between cities and country and different countries and nation states. So I'm going to start with you, Anju. So. But you say that it can be linked to efforts to bring down carbon emissions will also help air pollution, and vice versa. If we work on air pollution, it will help carbon emissions. So do you think that the transition to a electrified economy with less fossil fuel burning will have a large impact on air pollution, or just some impact?
Yes, Ruth, I think it's going to have a large impact, because if you look at the major air pollution sources, be it industries, be it transportation, all of them, are burning carbon-based fossil fuels. So once you move to the electrification, even, even at the power plant, we are majorly burning coal. So if we move to the renewable energy, if we move towards renewable side, so we are basically making the whole stream much cleaner as compared to what it is now. So we did one study just to look at, like, if India meets its NDC's commitment, so what would be its impact on the air quality and specifically on the all-cause mortality if we look the scenario from 2020 to 2050, and what would be the associated economic benefits. So we estimated that compared to the BAU scenario, if we look at the NDC scenario, where we assume that the India is going to meet its NDC commitment of shifting 40% of its installed capacity of power generation to at least renewables. So we found that around 14 million deaths due to the all-cause mortality would be avoided because of the reduced PM 2.5 exposure, and that could result in around economic benefits of around 2 trillion rupees, Indian rupees. So we can see, like, there is a huge co-benefits associated along with the climate policies and the low carbon transition.
I mean, that's hopefully very good news. And is it the same situation in Australia? If Professor Jalaludin, if we stop burning fossil fuels, will that help our air pollution?
Yes, it certainly would. A lot of our power plants burn coal, and so we really have to start at that level. We have to start at that level, so we have clean energy produced. If we are burning coal to make electricity and then using that to power our electric vehicles, we are just moving the problem from the city to where the power plants are. So as Anju has mentioned, we really need to look at the whole life cycle, and starting at what are we using to make our electricity. So yep, it will certainly make a big difference. But then there are also other health benefits. There's certainly those benefits where there are climate benefits. But so, for example, if we are looking at a city with a lot of traffic, and if we then want to reduce the traffic, reduce the congestion, If you're looking at ways to reduce working from home, for example, improving public transport, having smart cities to make it easier to look at your public transport timetables and how the connections work and so on. If you're building livable cities where you can walk to places rather than drive to places, we will increase our kind of levels of physical activity, active transport, and these will have benefits around cardiovascular disease, around diabetes, and around certain cancers. So it is not only the benefits will be at the climate level, but by looking at how we move around cities, how we work and at play and where we live, it will make a difference.
That's such an amazing interconnection between environmental issues and health issues there. I'm going to move to the questions that are in the Q&A, and the first one is for Professor Sharma, who was, I was about to ask you another question, but the first question's for you, so that works well. So Professor Sharma, this question from the Q&A is for you. So it says that you're one of the main persons suggesting AQI, which I'm hoping you know because I don't know what it is, to show the relative severity of pollution. For the benefit of those who are not experts, can you explain what that is and how it's calculated? Thank you.
The AQI stands for Air Quality Index. So it's a summary parameter which is in very simple terms to explain to ordinary people. So what is the status of air quality? Because, you know, it's a very, as you said very in the beginning, it's a very complex issue. And to take this issue to the general people and even to most, even to school children for that matter. So it's important that we translate those complexity into simple numbers. So this is what is the AQI. So we developed the AQI for the what we call as National Air Quality Index. Most of the things were done in the room where I'm sitting here right now. So what we did was that depending on the pollution levels, we translated those complicated levels of, you know, something like micrograms per meter cube into a unitless number from 0 to 100 as very good, or, you know, the quality. 100 to 200 is sort of moderate, 200 to 300 poor, and finally it is 400 to 500 means it's very severe. And we associated the problems of health along with that actually. So that, you know, and these calculations are based on the translating the concentration into a simple number. So they are segmented linear functions which we use. And this is generally for the people, and I'm happy this is extensively used not only at the public level, but at the courts and the governments and Supreme Court and all. So this has really become a very buzzword, and it is helping the nation.
And that, so that is the nation, not just Delhi and the major smart cities that are being rolled out across the whole country. Yeah. Correct. Oh, wow. And is this information delivered by something like the Weather Bureau, or is it the Bureau of Meteorology delivers it, or who is it an independent body that comes up with this measurements for all the different cities?
Yeah, it is generally done by the Central Pollution Control Board. So whatever the required software and all, they were developed, and that was sort of, you know, installed on their server, and they're coordinating the entire, you know, the monitoring and translation to the air quality index throughout the country. So there are about 400 or over 400 air quality stations in the country. So that would give us the spatially and as a you know, time sensitive air quality index at any time, and the dissemination is through the website and the press and media and the newspaper and radio.
Sounds great. And I think I've actually used it before and it was very helpful. And I also am really impressed by the openness of this. I remember being in another country in Asia, which we won't mention, and there was like a sign saying that the air quality was healthy and we couldn't go outside our house. So it's good that in India that you have people checking up on it. Okay, so the next question actually is to all three of you. And it's kind of saying, wants to know basically, is air pollution a city problem? Is it an urban problem? And therefore, if you're talking about air pollution in smart cities, isn't the whole idea of creating cities what the issue is? Yeah. So should we be talking about smart cities? Can you have a smart city that has good air quality, or do we actually need to live in smaller conglomerates in order to have good air quality?
This question is for all, or
yeah, that's questions for everybody. Yeah, yeah, because it's basically saying, isn't the smart city mission creating air pollution? Aren't cities creating air pollution?
Well, cities creating, but not the smart cities. If they are, have the right planning and right approach to the problem, they are not the one who are, add to the pollution. But in fact, they can prevent the pollution if they are being the smart cities actually. And in fact, they can do a lot because they are in a process of initial planning and taking a lot many actions, and they have the resources also at the same time. So I would think the smart cities can come forward and provide the solutions, and in fact, exemplary way how to handle the urban issues and urban pollution. But having said that, we should always remember, as we said in the beginning, that well, air pollution is simply not related to a region or the area. It is a rather a larger problem. And the way we like to handle it scientifically is the way we define what we call as the airshed. So airshed is an area spatially surrounding the city, and then we expect from what direction, to what an extent, and to what kind of levels could be brought into the city where the larger population is there. So you have to, sort of delineate the areas where the pollution is traveling to the city and deal this problem as just not an entity of urban pollution, but also deal it with a regional problem and find the solution for the region. And if you find the solution for the region, not only city will be cleaned up, but the larger area, which might include the rural area or other area, would also clean up. So the approach has to be, well, city specific, but do encompass the larger area, which is scientifically driven, as we call it, airshed.
Airshed like a watershed. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
And Professor Jalaludin, is this happening in Australia? Australia is one of the most urban countries on the planet, right? It's a continent, but it's one of the most urban countries on the planet. Does its high levels of urbanization create extra air pollution?
Yes, it does. And I guess it's mainly because with the high levels, with high population levels in urban centers, we're more likely to drive. Households have 1 to 3 cars. Many households have 2 cars. And when the children are grown up, they end up having their own. So, it's a traffic related, it's a local issue. But I think what Professor Sharma said is absolutely correct. You have to deal in terms of airshed. And in New South Wales, we don't only look at Sydney as a metropolitan area, but we look at the airshed, which also includes 2 other large towns, Newcastle and Wollongong. So that's our airshed, which is probably 200 kilometers long and about 50, 60 kilometers wide. Perhaps a little
and
bit
both
wider.
of those towns actually are coal mining, steel producing.
They are.
Yeah.
They used to be. There were heavy industry in both those towns, steel making, the coal mining areas. So as you mentioned, so you have to look at all the sources within the airshed and deal with them simultaneously. But certainly there will be local hotspots here and there, and in cities, traffic is one of the major sources, and wood burning in the homes. Look.
I'm still disturbed by that one. Okay, the next question is kind of a very much kind of a futurist, well, in some ways, I guess futuristic, some ways not, technological approach to air pollution. So it's asking if it's possible to get rid of air pollution through using artificial rains. In my head, I'm thinking doesn't that just make water pollution? But anyway, I'm wondering, you will know more than me. I know that cloud seeding is a big a future focused program in your neighbors to the north in China, along the Tibetan Plateau, and trying to increase water flow. Is there any programs in northern India to try and do cloud seeding, create artificial rains, and would do rains have a positive effect on air pollution? Anju, do you want to take that one to start off with?
Yeah, sure, Ruth. Rain do have a positive impact on air pollution, but when we talk about artificial rain, so one needs to understand the mechanism through which these rains are being created, and whether the resources that are being used, do they make any changes in the ambient humidity level that may have any adverse impact on people's health. So those linkages needs to be understand before we proceed for any such intervention, in my opinion. And it's always better, when you talk about these measures, so they are basically curbing just these are like a short term or the immediate measures that can reduce pollution for a shorter duration, but ultimately the long term solution would remain control at the source. So that's always a priority.
So that leads me to another question, which I'm going to start with Professor Sharma. Does the positive effect that rains have on pollution mean that future changes in the climate, which may lead to a decrease in the Indian monsoon, would have a negative effect on air pollution? Does that make your job harder? Will climate change make your job harder?
Yes, I tend to agree with that. Of course, there are not much of scientific reasons to support that, but more from the common sense point of view. If the rains are sort of disturbed and monsoon is disturbed, so what we are observing right now is that monsoon, probably the quantity of the rains are about the same, but the intensity is much more on fewer days actually. So what we used to experience was the long period of, drizzling and long period of small rains over a larger period, longer period, but that seems to be not true anymore actually. So what would happen is that we would have the sort of intense rain for a few days, and then we are back to square one in terms of the air quality. So I think that is very valid point. Of course, there are more scientific thing has to be done, but this is true that climate change would have would sort of, in that sense, hamper our efforts to have the more cleaner days, because the rain duration or rain periods have reduced actually. So he's right actually, in my opinion.
So that means you'll have to work extra hard to get particulates out of the air because you'll have less rain, but also by getting particulates out of the air, you might help lower the changes in the climate. So both ways could work. Yeah.
If I could make a comment, Ruth.
It would be fantastic. I was just about to ask you what the deal was in Australia with this stuff.
Look, I sort of don't know much about artificial rain. It's really out of my expertise. I'm a public health physician, so my background then tends to think in terms of prevention. So why do we want to go down the pathway of artificial rain when we do not know much about it, how it works, what the other side effects might be? It's a short-term effects, as has been mentioned. And I think we are going down that kind of technology-driven pathway that technology will solve everything. And so let's not worry about trying to mitigate air pollution, improving air quality by the ways that we've talked about, getting cars off the road, having better fuel quality, better various things. So I think we still need to focus back on how can we reduce air pollution through other means, and how can we prevent it in the first instance.
So excellent. This is my other learning for the day, is that this idea of prevention being better than a cure works not just in health, but public health and also environmental issues. Yes, that's a really excellent way of putting it. So the diagnosis then, I was going to ask you quickly just to tell me, or what you think your diagnosis is. The diagnosis for Australia and India's cities good or bad? Just quickly, Professor Jalaludin.
I think for Australian cities, it's good.
Okay. Anju?
Yeah, for Indian cities, we all know the situation, but I'm sure down the line, like after 4 or 5 years, we'll definitely come to the good situation. Yeah.
And I'm guessing, Professor Sharma, you agree with Anju's diagnosis?
Well, I think the diagnostics is very good. We understand our issues very well now. So beyond diagnostics, I think we need more treating physicians and treating surgeons, just or the pure diagnostics. And
Yes.
I think, and I would think that, well, we also, we have a lot of tendency as a human being to analyze things a lot. I think in my judgment, once you know the reasons well, I think too much analysis would lead to paralysis. So I think it's a time to take the action. Thank you very much.
Just do it. Yeah. Okay. That's very good.
Just
Thank you
do
so. Yes. All right. I'd like to thank you all. You've been a wonderful guest today. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has learned a lot as well. So thank you to Anju, Professor Jalaludin, Professor Sharma. I'd also like to thank the audience and let you know that the recording of the webinar will be placed online in a few days. We'll send you a link out to everyone who is registered. And that's everything for today. Goodbye, and thanks for coming and listening to us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.